Too fast.
Okay, good afternoon. I would like to call to order this joint special meeting of the Encinitas City Council and the Infrastructure Task Force for Wednesday, November 15th, 2023 at 3 p.m. And would the clerk please call the roll?
Absolutely. We'll start with City Council. Councilmember Hinsey.
Here.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Here.
Councilmember Blackwell.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Here.
Mayor Crayons.
Here.
And then I'll move to the Infrastructure Task Force. Chair Culp.
Here.
Vice Chair Maloney. Here. Member Mansi Nunes. Member Moreland. Member Rowley. Member Stern. And Member Valenzuela.
No member Valenzuela.
So all members of the City Council are present, and all members of the Infrastructure Task Force are present, with the exception of Member Valenzuela.
Okay, we gathered today to discuss the Infrastructure Task Force, get an update and input on the project ranking rubric, project list, and final report. And Engineering Director Bankston is going to lead this meeting, but I did want to start it off with a little something that I found interesting to read and share. This is one of those old reports of the city. You could tell it's old because it's got the microfiche look to it, you know. And it's a City of Encinitas staff report from February 15th, 1995 to the mayor and the city council from city manager Lauren Wasserman. And the subject is the interim report on work project to prepare a specific plan for the realignment of Saxony Road north of Encinitas Boulevard in Old Encinitas. And it starts by saying the Dawkins study of October 27, 1988 recommended improvements to the I-5 interchanges within Encinitas to satisfy the long-range year 2010 forecasted traffic demand within acceptable levels of service. The study further states, quote, additionally, it is concluded that the city should proceed with the realignment of Saxony Road as an adjunct to capacity improvements to the Encinitas interchange. End quote. And I read this to point out the fact that almost 30 years ago, there were conversations about our infrastructure and the need to make improvements to our infrastructure in order to meet level of service needs in our community. And I can tell you that very few, with the exception of Leucadia Boulevard at Piraeus, which was actually made worse by Caltrans, not better, there really is no change in any of the interchanges that I-5 has here in our city. So this task of identifying infrastructure needs, you know, obviously beyond just service road improvements is long overdue, and I appreciate all the work that you've done. So I look forward to hearing your report, and so that we can, from an informed perspective, informed point of view, continue the conversation about the desperate need we have for infrastructure improvements. So with that, Jill, if you begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council Infrastructure Task Force members. My name is Jill Bankstone. I'm the Director of Engineering, and I'm going to walk you through some information related to the Infrastructure Task Force. And it's also an opportunity for Council to provide some input on the Infrastructure Task Force work. With me this afternoon is Amy Rastelli from Kimley Horn, Carolee Jakels from Kimley Horn, and then up at the staff table here is Linda Culp, who's a chair of our Infrastructure Task Force. So tonight this afternoon, we will go through a little background on the ITF, our past efforts, the work that remains to be done, the ranking rubric for the projects, the master list of projects, and then finally our ITF final report. So back in November 2022 is when the City Council established the Infrastructure Task Force. In January of 2023, the members were appointed. Oh, thank you, UB. It provided us with a few goals for the Infrastructure Task Force. The main three were developing a prioritization rubric for capital projects or infrastructure projects, determining the infrastructure backlog and future needs, and then evaluating potential new revenue sources to complete the infrastructure projects that we identify. So to date, we've had 12 Infrastructure Task Force meetings. Today will be the 13th since February 2023 when we first convened. So this lays out the meetings that we've had and the topics that we've covered since the beginning. In February, we had our kickoff and our overview of the process. In March, our finance director came and provided an overview of our city budget and our revenues and expenditures. In April through July, we had city departments come by and talk about their infrastructure needs within the city. Then starting in July, we started looking at how are other jurisdictions prioritizing their infrastructure needs and their capital projects. In August, we drafted the master project list and we started reviewing funding opportunities, different revenue opportunities for capital projects. September, we were reviewing the ranking rubrics and making adjustments. And then last month, we were refining the rubric that we've brought for you tonight and looking at funding recommendations and potential polling for the citizens. So moving forward through the end of the task force, we have this work tonight to get the City Council feedback on the rubric, the project list, and the final report. We anticipate beginning polling efforts later this month. In December, we'll have the draft ITF report with our recommendations. By January, we'll have polling results back, and that will enable us to create the final ITF report. And then either very late January or early February, we'll bring our final ITF report to City Council with recommendations. With that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Amy, who will walk us through the ranking criteria and rubric.
All right, so to start, we just basically we did a cursory research of a bunch of peer agencies and how they go about their prioritization process. We narrowed it down to a list of 6 that you see here on the top of the screen. And from there, these were really representative of different styles of prioritization criteria. From there, we presented that to the ITF, and the ITF was able to start narrowing down which types of prioritization rubrics were preferred. And from there, the ITF started assigning scoring weights to fit the local goals of the city of Encinitas. And then from there, those criteria and scoring weights were refined and scoring guidelines were created. Some of the common themes that we identified from the different peer agency samples: public health and safety was a criterion that was consistently weighted throughout all of the samples that we looked at, and it was consistently weighted the highest. Additionally, infrastructure condition and longevity appeared in all of the rubrics that we looked at for all of the different samples. The scoring factor for public support definitely varied if it was even present at all, and I think that was definitely a topic that the ITF covered a lot throughout our conversations, was if we wanted to include that or not, and if so, what weight that brought about. And then the economic contribution appeared on most of them, but the definition of economic contribution varied across the board. So I know this is a lot to look at here. I want to hone in, if you click the next one, right here, you can see that, as I mentioned, risk to health and safety, the infrastructure improvement and needed maintenance, and the economic contribution, those were across the board pretty consistent on all of the different examples that we looked at. And then basically the rest of them varied, whether they were included or not in some form or capacity. And then I want to draw attention to the right side of the table here. If you click that, there were most, if not all, had some level of quantitative analysis, whether that be GIS or crash data, equity analysis, some type of quantitative, not just qualitative review of some of these criterion. As well as the fact that I wanted to point out that 2 of the examples that we looked at had what we could call a variable scoring factor, which means that within the different criterion, the weight attributed to that criterion was different based on the type of project. So if it was an infrastructure project versus a park project, it had different weights. And so we looked at that with the ITF and ultimately decided that if we're bringing these all back together into one list of projects, then that would be kind of comparing apples to oranges, so we veered away from that approach. So this is the draft matrix or rubric that we've developed as a group. And And I'll walk through each of these in the next slides, but in general, the final 5 categories that were decided upon were risk to health, safety, and regulatory or mandated requirements, identified infrastructure need and asset longevity, sustainability, environmental conservation, and resilience, livability and equitable community investment, and consistency with city priorities. So I know that this goes against PowerPoint rules of the amount of text that should be on a slide, but we wanted to provide you with the amount of information that will be available to the person that will be actually doing the scoring. So this is exactly the information that would be provided. So we wanted to provide all of that to you, but I'll walk through each of these slides slowly with you as well. So to start, for risk to health, safety, and regulatory or mandated requirements. So starting with the bullet points at the bottom of the slide, the first 2 major bullet points are really related to the risk to health and safety. So this would be a project that reduces risk to health and safety associated with the infrastructure based on a conditional assessment. And then we have provided examples below, such as water main breaks, improving structural integrity, mitigation of health and environmental hazards, safety improvements, reduced environmental or emergency response times. And I want to note that that 4th bullet, safety improvements that reduce fatalities and serious injuries, would be a quantitative analysis that would be provided to the scoring group. So we combined this with the city's LRSP and basically identified the high collision corridors and intersections, and if any project were to address a safety concern that was identified in the LRSP, then that would just automatically receive full points. So that would not be any kind of subjective review of whether or not a project reduces fatalities and serious injuries, whereas the other ones are a little bit more able to be discerned based on the project description. We also identified that if a deferral would directly affect the future risk to public health and safety, that's important to note as well. The last 2 bullets are more related to regulatory and mandated requirements, so that's that the project increases compliance with state or federal law or reduces liability associated with assets that are not consistent with newer regulations. So taking that, now that we understand what we're talking about here for this criteria and going into the scoring, so the maximum scoring points would be 30. And if you click and we'll just highlight through these. So no points means that the project does not address existing health and safety issues and is not legally mandated. Half points would mean that the project maintains or improves public health or safety, that the project may be deferred without impacting health and safety, and the project is not legally mandated. Full points basically means that the project provides an essential service for public health and safety, that a deferral would impact future health and safety, and/or the project is legally mandated. And so I actually did want to provide a quick example there for the and/or. So one example would be that, so there's a bridge project in our prioritization list, and one of the bridges is structurally deficient, but is not currently a risk to public health and safety, but if deferred, it could become a risk to public health and safety. So that one would, in that sense, it would get full points under this category. Another example would be Pacific View. So that is a closed building with outdated features that do pose a risk to public health and safety, but because it's not currently open to the public, would not get the full points, it would get half points. Okay, so then number 2 is the identified infrastructure need and asset longevity. So this means that a project addresses substandard asset conditions. The project improves overall reliability of a capital asset and extends the useful life, reduces maintenance expenditures, or it addresses an infrastructure or facility need that was identified as a priority by a city planning document or city staff, or the project serves areas with higher population densities and areas experiencing most growth. So from there, going up to the points, no points is that it is not identified as a priority need, and it does not improve longevity or reliability. Half points is that it is indirectly related to an infrastructure need, or it maintains safe assets nearing the end of their useful life. And full points is it is identified as a priority city need, or corrects existing deficiencies to maintain critical functioning of the asset. So actually going back to that, another example, so I'm thinking about those bridge projects again. So there was another bridge project in the list that was structurally deficient due to Caltrans standard widths. It is not a risk to health and safety, so it would not achieve the full points in the previous category, but it is necessary in order to maintain critical functioning. So it would receive full points in this category instead. Just trying to highlight the difference between that 1 and 2, because I think that can get a little confusing. So moving on to number 3. Again, a lot of text on here, so we'll break it down. This is sustainability, environmental conservation, and resilience. So if you click once, we'll just focus on the definition. We define these first in order to make sure that we're all on the same page when we think about this scoring. So sustainability is the satisfaction of a basic social and economic need while maintaining or improving the well-being of the environment of which life depends. Environmental conservation is the careful maintenance and upkeep of a natural resource to prevent it from disappearing. And then resilience is the capacity to prevent, withstand, respond to, and recover from a disruption. So with that, the project would receive no points if it does not improve any of these 3 categories. It would receive half of the 16 points if it meets one of the 3 categories, and full points if it achieves 2 or more of the 3 categories. Moving on to number 4. So this is equitable community investment, livability and equitable community investment. So this means that the top 2 bullets are really related to the livability. So the project would contribute to community development or accessibility to employment, schools, community services, or recreation. The last 3 bullets are more related to the equitable community investment. So that means that it addresses disparities in infrastructure, promotes diversity, equity, inclusion, or improves access for all people of all ages and abilities. And moving to the points, you would receive no points if it does not improve this category, half points if it indirectly improves livability and or equity, and full points if it directly improves livability and or equity. And the last category is consistency with city priorities. So on the bottom half of the screen, you can see that there is the 5 city priorities. And we should note that, when this ITF rubric or criteria is written in the report, it will indicate that we know that the city priorities may change in the future, and that this will basically just be applicable to whatever the city priorities are at the time. And so for scoring, the project would receive no points if it is not consistent with the city priorities, half points if it addresses one city priority, and full points if it addresses multiple city priorities. So I know that was a lot of information and a lot of words on the screen, so we wanted to open it up to any questions or comments just related to that rubric for now.
Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. So from my read, it sounds like ADA accessibility falls under category 4, the livability in equity category.
I think it could achieve points there as well as regulatory or mandated requirements.
Legally required.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a few questions for clarity, I think. Jill, you mentioned something about polling and what's coming up Could you refresh my memory what that is, what that activity is?
Yeah, so part of the task of the infrastructure task force is to look at the needs in the community, look at our current city budget, and determine if there is additional revenue that needs to be secured in order to implement a 10-year plan that will bring forward infrastructure improvements. So what we are looking to embark upon now is polling of our residents to understand what their priorities are as far as infrastructure, and if they could be supportive of a ballot measure in the future.
That's a whole topic that needs to be talked about in more detail, I just want to say.
Yes.
Because it's a little bit the next step, which we didn't capture in the committee's tasks.
So it's part of evaluating whether a new funding mechanism would be viable or feasible, and it will be brought forward in our final report. So if the polling comes back, yep, this is something the community would support, then we will make that recommendation. If the polling comes back and says, nope, the community doesn't want that, then we would kind of narrow our 10-year CIP plan and say our recommendation is just to move forward with the funding that we've been dealing with in the past.
Okay. There are other funding sources that the city can pursue other than getting a vote of the people. So your polling is more for a vote of the people, is what you're...
Yes, and our final report will include recommendations and information on the task force findings as it relates to some of those other funding opportunities, such as public-private partnerships and things like that.
Okay. And then my other clarification is, I don't know which slide would be helpful to go back to. Maybe this one's fine to stay on. But the maximum score, I'm trying to figure out how that math actually works when you consider a project. I'm big on examples, so perhaps I'm trying to understand if a project like Pacific View, where we're investing, we've got a history of saying, yes, this is important to us and we're investing in Pacific View. If it goes through this criteria with the maximum scores and how the maximum scores are weighted, 0, half, or full, I'm wondering how a project like Pacific View would ever come out higher priority than a bridge project if the bridge project was deemed to be an imminent failure. I'm just contrasting two things. Could you help me work through the math on that?
Sure. So I think what the infrastructure task force was looking at was kind of matching up with what some of our peer agencies have done and looking at what the task force felt were the most important things. So if we have something that's failing, if we have something that, like the bridge is falling down, needs to be replaced, that's where they felt we should focus our priorities. However, that being said, this prioritization is meant to be a guide, and of course, City Council can choose to fund whichever projects they choose to fund.
So the answer to your question was it might not rank higher. There might not be any way for the math to work to ever rank a forward-looking enhancement project higher than a deemed risk project.
Correct.
Yes. And when you think about that in real kind of black and white ways, you go, well, yeah. But I think there's a lot of details in here about, and you said up front that it has a lot to do with definitions. Our consultant said up front, it has a lot to do with definitions. So we might want to drill down on where we need more clarity with some of our definitions, although I can understand you're starting to capture that here. I really want to look at this in terms of who have we been and how have we made decisions? Who are we now and how we make, not only how we make decisions, but the decisions that we're prioritizing. And how can we carry some of that forward without compromising really important infrastructure projects too? So I guess I'll need more input, but I'm kind of leaning towards, I think the maximum scores are a little out of alignment for who we are in Encinitas. And I understand they came from what other communities are doing. So I get that. There are other communities and they have their own alignment. Might be leaning in the direction that those maximum scores really throw out a lot of things that we think are important. And it probably has to do with the actual true numbers we're showing and then our definitions of what things mean. But that's my only comment.
Councilmember Blackwell.
Yes, thank you. I like the rubric a lot, and when I read the criteria, just the ones on the left column, they all made sense. And then I started digging into it and thinking about the last one shown on the page, the consistency with city priorities. And there are 5 city priorities, and there's a lot of overlap with the other categories. And I thought it'd be great to get some comment on, did that get discussed? What did you see? I didn't really see in the previous city-by-city ranking that one showed up. So maybe just a little more comment or color of why you added that and didn't weave it into the others.
I will ask Linda and Amy to kind of provide some of that context. I think part of it is kind of what we were speaking to, what Councilmember Lyons was speaking to. It gives you that ability to put some points on stuff that we as a community think is important. But again, I'll defer to the rest of the team.
I think one piece that I'll add, and you can add too, is that I think that is the reason that it's ranked so low, is the consistency with city priorities could be somewhat of a double dipping. And that's why we didn't want it to be as high as something like a risk to health and safety. But we did start that one pretty high, I believe, and over the course of, we've met multiple times to discuss this and do practice runs with sample projects, and this one kept going down a little bit. But in terms of actually overlapping, we did not identify that overlap. I think there could be, but I think it's okay somewhat to double dip if it's not weighted as high, if that makes sense. But yes, most of the other peer agencies did do some level of support with or consistency with planning documents, local goals. So yeah, exactly. You have that slide pulled up.
I think if I could just add some of the comments from the task force when we've been talking about this for a few meetings was, first of all, it was important to include as a criteria. It's in our sort of scope of work to be consistent with those city goals, so it was important to us as a group to have that. With the understanding that those other ones we felt were a higher, should be scored a little bit higher. And the other comment was maybe these are nice broad goals, not as technical as some of the others, so they both enhanced each other in the criteria.
Thank you, it's really helpful. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Boy, that was right along the same lines as my question. And now I understand why. I was going to ask, why is it lower? Now I understand. Did you consider making number 5 consistency with city goals and maybe being a little more specific? And I carry around my strategic plan goals, right? And down at the bottom, the 6, 23, 24 are safe, legal, railroad crossings, I won't read them all, but habitat stewardship, prioritizing streetscape, Quail Gardens Drive, Saxony Westlake, utilize housing solutions, and 100% affordable housing. And I'd like to see maybe that rubric, that portion of the rubric pointed at those more particular goals, so that if it is something that is right on our collective, that we've already talked about, that it gets that extra 10 points, potentially, 12 points, I guess it is. So, but other than that, you already answered my question, so thank you.
I have, so one of the changes in phraseology there between goals and priorities is that we establish our priorities with our budget. And so there are, in fact, some things that we do fund that may not be on our list of goals, So to me, I do think priorities is the right word, and it should be driven largely by what we're budgeting. I think that it's unfortunate the choice to compare the failing bridge with Pacific View was a little odd because Pacific View isn't even in this report. Pacific View is not infrastructure. It is an asset of the city, and years ago, a decision was made to acquire that particular asset and to watch the building crumble, even though nobody was going to die because we had a fence around the place to keep everybody out. It was clear that the purpose for acquiring the site was to have community gatherings there. And so there was a decision to make the investment to make it habitable and to conduct activities there. So, but by the same token, the failing bridges are unacceptable. So finding a way to identify how we can obtain the resources to make those investments is important as well. So I appreciate the work that you've done here. Is this a pause to, and you're going to continue the presentation? Okay.
Yeah, so our hope is that if you guys would like to provide any specific feedback on, hey, instead of 30 points, we think this one should be 20 points, and we think you should add a couple points to this or that, that would help us when we're going to bring back the final report early next year.
Yeah, I'm good with the work you've done. Yeah, thank you. Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Can we take a moment and talk about infrastructure and what was considered infrastructure? I think that, I believe that a project like Pacific View, I think Pacific View is in the document. Now, I thought it was in there because it's an asset that the city owns that we make decisions about investing in. Would our community center also be one of the things that's in here if there's a need there? Can we talk for a minute about what's included in infrastructure then? I think that would be helpful.
Sure. So one of the attachments to the staff report is the list of 184 projects. So that includes, so in that infrastructure list, and we have a part further down where we talk about how the list came together. But an infrastructure project is anything that's over $100,000 and has a useful life of more than 5 years. So it's not programs, but it is any physical thing that we're building that will last more than 5 years and cost more than $100,000.
And you probably know what all that is in your head, but could you say it so that, we all are on the same page as you are? So over $100,000 and a useful life of, so what would that include? For instance, does it include stormwater conveyance, whatever that might include? Does it include underground? Well, it doesn't include utilities, I know that, because those are not owned by us. But does it include our water system, potable water delivery system? Yeah.
Yeah, so we had, it includes, we didn't include water and sewer in this. It does include drainage and streets and roads and bridges and parks and buildings and all of those things. The reason why we pulled out utilities, and we will talk about utilities in the final report, but the funding for utilities it's enterprise funding. So the only funding that can go into it are ratepayer fees. So it's kind of a separate animal than the way that we fund the rest of our infrastructure program.
Is there anything else that maybe you could add to that list that we might not think is infrastructure? I'm going to just kind of put it out there that I'm going to add open space. Because the city owns it, it's an asset. We put it forward for acquisition, we put it forward for maintenance and management, and so forth. And sometimes there's additional recreational uses.
For sure, yeah.
You're nodding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I just think that's really important because the way we're using the term infrastructure, I think a lot of people think it's going to be roads and maybe they'd understand drainage. But I think our definition for the purposes of how this will be used is broader than that.
Yes, agreed.
I have one comment that just is glaring at me, so I'll give this feedback now. On this slide we have up on slide 12, when we're looking at item number 4, livability and equitable community investment, when I first read that, I was confused by it, but when you presented it, I understand. But when you presented it, you said and or. And I think that or is really important. So if we could, this is a very tangible comment, if we could put livability and or equitable community investment, I think I would understand item number 4 much better because sometimes they're not absolutely tied together and it has to meet both. It could meet one or the other.
Yep, good comment.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. I just had one thing that I wanted to add on the topic that Deputy Mayor Lyons is bringing up. When you started this endeavor, we had identified the goal for 100% affordable housing, but we hadn't acted on it yet. And as of last Wednesday, we did act on that. So I'm hoping we can add 100% affordable housing project to the list of the city assets that we have. Thank you.
Actually, I disagree with that. I think that we need to keep this focused on the infrastructure issues. There's no question that the issue of 100% affordable project is something that we're going to have to tackle, but, to me, this should be pretty focused on the original infrastructure list that was part of the proposal for this engagement. So perhaps at the end, we can get back to that and as a council decide if that's something we want to have in there. Deputy Mayor Lyons?
Thank you. Then that, in order to help us work through those comments, I would really like to add a definition of infrastructure to this document. If it's here and I've missed it, I apologize. But what's in and what's out, I think, is sometimes different in everyone's view. So that's a fundamental first thing to be clear on. Thank you. And I want to pose one other thing and just get the committee's reflection on this and staff's reflection on this. So we have the item number 1 here under criteria, which is risk to health, safety, et cetera. We know what that is. And then we have item number 2, already identified need. So I see number 2 as an already identified infrastructure need. So that's almost like double dipping to me. And there you've got almost 50 points. You've got 48 points for something. I see that as getting double points and the highest points available for the same thing. Am I seeing that right?
So the intent behind an identified need means it's in a planning document. So if it's in the map, so it's a sidewalk, then it would get the points for an identified need, but it wouldn't get any points for a risk to health and safety unless it's on a corridor where we have, a demonstrated history of collisions or fatalities or something like that. So the intent behind that number 2 is it's already on our donut list or the LRSP or the Trails Master Plan or the ATP, one of those, that's what we're considering an identified need.
Okay. That could help use some clarification too. I'd appreciate that. Again, what is asset longevity? How do you define that?
Yeah, so we can certainly add some definitions in our final report that help explain some of these terms, but I think one of the examples that comes to mind for that is we've got corrugated metal pipes that are failing. If we go out there and line them instead of replacing them, then that helps us with the longevity of the asset.
Yeah, that's a little tough, I think, because it might be variable by type of materials used, which might not actually, I'm wondering how that's relevant to the criteria. I'm just trying to picture how you would use that then to be relevant. And maybe this again goes back to examples because those always really help me. So if we have something maybe we have something, I don't know what it is. Let's say it's a bridge again, I'm sorry, but I can visualize that there's a known life expectancy on some of the materials, so you would expect in 40 years, I'm just playing with numbers here, that it would be at its life expectancy. So asset longevity, well, it's already at its life expectancy. Is that somehow in this? Or I think I hear you say maybe it's also looking towards the future about, well, how are you going to address the repair or the infrastructure change and development so that there's increased longevity? I'm just not sure how that's used. Maybe my colleagues have a view on that, but it's confusing to me.
Yeah, so I think we're looking at, is something at the end of its useful life? Is there a project we can do that needs to be done to replace it or extend its useful life? Is kind of the main point of the asset longevity.
And I would add, if that, that useful life, if the end of that useful life poses a risk to health and safety, then that's when you get the points on number 1. If it's just making a deficiency, then that's when you get the high points for number 2.
I'm not clear on that either. Sorry. Definitions, I think, are going to be really, really, really helpful.
Sure.
Not only to me, but maybe most people.
Sure.
Thank you.
I see also that attachment 3 goes into the CIP aspects and how we kind of define the work that this infrastructure task force is going to do. Madam City Manager?
Thank you. Maybe I can kind of simplify it a little bit. So from a budgetary standpoint, we include things in our capital improvement program that are over $100,000 and have a life over 5 years. So your infrastructure can include not just the building itself, it can also be what you project that you'll need to keep the building going. So it can be some maintenance as well. So what would be taken into consideration when this list was developed, when you're talking about, let's say, city facilities or assets, is things like the roof, looking ahead to items that need to be replaced, et cetera. So I'm not sure, Deputy Mayor Lyons, if that helps to answer your question, or if there's something, and this is a bit of a swipe at this time period. These are the programs and projects and planning documents that we have now. It's possible that the council could adopt another type of planning document that would include additional infrastructure assets that we would need to put into the plan, but this is where we started.
Councilmember Ehlers.
And so, yeah, I had a question along the same line, but I'm looking at, I'll take the stormwater as an example where we reline it and that extends its life. Everything that was just said, both by the city manager, by staff, I applied to pavement. And I go, hey, we're relining pavement. You know, we're not putting inside, but yet pavement doesn't show up in here. Our pavement reconditioning is not part of this today, yet relining a storm drain is. So I can understand the confusion because it's a subtle difference between the two, and maybe staff could take a shot at why we shouldn't include pavement in here as an asset, that lining it or slurry sealing it actually extends its life. It meets all the criteria that was named off as far as value and lifetime. So why one but not the other?
Pavement is in the list.
The
Let us find
slurries-
the project number. Give us a minute.
Yeah, is it right at the end on page 14? That's roadway.
No.
Is it in the roadway category? Yeah, should be. 175, I'm hearing.
Oh, okay. I was looking at the section starting at 189 to 197, and
There it is, yes. 175.
perfect. Okay, good. I missed it. Excellent. So we're treating them the same way then?
Yes.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. What next?
All right. So we will move on to the next piece, and that is the development of the master project list. So we wanted to give you a little bit of information about how we developed that list of 184 projects, and my apologies that it looks like it's 197. I have some rows on there that accidentally got numbered but aren't shown on the list. So we had the various departments of the city come and present to the infrastructure task force their infrastructure projects and needs. So we heard from our CIP division, our traffic division, coastal management, our climate action plan, our modal alternatives. Public Works came and talked about facilities. Our fire and marine safety came. Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Arts came. Our utilities department and our infrastructure technology team. So once we had that list, the full list was over 300 projects, but we did see a whole bunch of overlap and kind of duplication. So we went through and refined that list of over 300 projects We clarified projects that should be combined or project descriptions and statuses that needed to be updated. We reviewed the costs to make sure that we weren't double counting projects. We got rid of the duplicates and the overlaps. We removed projects that were either completed or are already fully funded and scheduled for construction. We got rid of projects that were just staff time, so we're relying just on the infrastructure projects. And as I discussed, we got rid of the utility projects because they have a separate funding source that doesn't really apply to the effort that we're doing here. And then for the MAP, we just kept the top 70 MAP projects, not all of the MAP projects. So then after we had refined that list from the over 300, we got down to 184, and then we lumped them into 8 different categories. So you'll see that in that 4th column of the big table that's attached to the staff report: bike and pedestrian mobility, climate action plan, coastal management, drainage, facility improvements, IT, railway corridor, and roadway. So then after we had the list of 184 projects that are here, our city staff took a stab at pulling out kind of the highest priority of that long list. And we have kind of a short list of 73 projects that are the city department highlighted projects. And we can share that with you as well. But to give you a little bit of information on the scope and scale of that, the refined project list of the 184 projects is $932 million. So if we were try to create a 10-year CIP plan to deliver everything that we've ever wanted to achieve, that would cost $93 million per year. If we just focused more closely on the city highlighted department list, that would be $387 million in total, or $38 million over 10 years. And just to refresh your memory, for the capital budget, we typically put about $4 million into our paving program, and then we have between 3.5 and 4 that's split up among the capital projects. So you can see there's a big discrepancy between our available resources and the amount of infrastructure projects we'd like to deliver to the city. So this is the opportunity, now that you've had a chance to kind of look through the project list. As we discussed, this list was put together kind of in the spring, early summer timeframe, and some new projects have come up. This may be an opportunity to get some more council input around the affordable housing. One of the other projects that has recently come up is the Hippie Hill site, if you wanted to add that to the list for some kind of improvements or restoration or something at Hippie Hill. Later on tonight, we've got an item where we'll be bringing forward infrastructure recommendations around housing element sites. So if you'd like, we can add those top priorities into this list as well. But we wanted to kind of catch your attention and see if there are any projects that you felt weren't included but should have been.
Mayor Kranz has had to step out of the room, and I will step in as deputy mayor while he's out. Councilmember Ehlers.
Just talking about projects, the donut chart. Does this donut chart of the unfunded, the design but unfunded, and all the ones with red, are they all in here? Is it a one-to-one correspondence? So, okay.
Yes, they're in there.
Because I would start with, this is probably where our priority has been in the past. I would certainly want to start here and work our way down. Second point is, I don't know if you brought the pavement condition index. I'm going to make my pitch.
Yes.
That I think it's a great chart. It shows, 15, 20-year history of our PCI, Pavement Condition Index. It also overlays our $4 million a year for the last at least 4 years. We've gone up a little. And what it doesn't have, it doesn't show the cost of asphalt and the cost of construction going through the roof the last 3-4 years. And what we see is our goal is, near the top there we never achieve the 80, but even trying to keep and maintain our current condition index, we keep dropping, and we're projected to continue dropping. All this tells me $4 million a year is insufficient to protect the asset in its current condition. And I know the backlog's probably 10 million or more, maybe 75 million. But the answer ought to be somewhere greater than 4, certainly indexed to inflation for the future, and possibly, you know, half again more or double. I don't know what number is reasonable, but I want that to be in there too, so.
And Councilmember Blackwell.
Yes, thank you. I think I did have that question about the projects we're going to see in the regular council meeting later and the housing element study. So there's a list of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. There's a lot of projects on there. Has the task force compared those two, meaning this list of 184 against all of the tiers of that study?
We haven't yet, so we have not brought that information into the task force yet.
That would be great to do if I could ask that to happen, but particularly because I think we're going to be asked to give some input on top 5, or that may become top 10. But anyway, there'll be somewhat of a ranking of those. It'd be really important to capture those and any other tier 1, I think. But I'm guessing there's a pretty hefty overlap with the 184. My other question was just on the 73 projects you mentioned, the city department highlighted ones. Is that evident in the handout we received?
It's not. I probably should have attached it, but I've got it and I'll post it to the Infrastructure Task Force website and I'll send a link to all you guys.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Councilmember Hinsey.
Thank you. Am I blind? Is Pacific View on this list and I'm just not able to see it?
Sorry, Pacific View is not on the list because it's fully funded.
Oh, okay. But for future years, I think we have other goals that we'd like to achieve. Would there be a way for us to include it for enhanced improvements? Just to answer your question, I support all of the things that you suggested we add on here, as Councilmember Blackwell suggested as well. And then I also would like to add some of the bike emergency projects that have gone to the Mobility Commission, I think just this week. And it seems to me that there's a way for when they show up in multiple places, like you said, the map, the ATP, the housing element update sites, and the bike emergency, that shows that it's a pretty good project. So maybe some of those will rise to the top and we'll be able to identify funding.
Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Thank you. Jill, did you and your staff come up with this list of 73? Or was the committee involved?
So the committee wasn't involved in that. So we took the 194 and then, or 184, and then we asked the departments, what are your priorities? What are the things that your department really needs to see as far as improvements to the infrastructure in the city? So we took that information, and over the past week, we've been kind of trying to put it in a format that's a little bit more legible, but it's something that we're going to talk about in upcoming Infrastructure Task Force meetings, which is why it wasn't included in this report yet, because our team hasn't had a chance to really look at it yet.
Okay, good. Thanks for that clarification. I do think it's important for that to be a list of staff recommendations because you're already prioritizing by doing that. And that's important to know, and I appreciate that information. Kind of a working document, and it sounds like that's what it is, yeah.
Correct.
I just wanted to make one comment that's maybe somewhat associated with what the next steps are. And you've said the next step, well, we've got this short list or shorter list, not short yet, that will be deliverable from the committee. The way that we've characterized the committee work is prioritization of the prioritization rubric, identifying future needs, and then identifying future revenue sources. I have not seen the committee being in the position of actually going through the process of coming up with priorities based on applying the rubric. And the reason that I have not seen that as a step that the committee takes is because I don't know, it may not be publicly received as well as allowing the public process to come forward with some more input through us bringing on a rubric and then applying it. I just from the public comment I've received through this process, there is some concern in the community that the selection of our priorities for infrastructure not be placed in the subcommittee's hands, that's actually coming through the public process and a city council action. And I think we all know that, but I would like to just make that statement to say that I'm clear that that's what will happen, but I want to see how everyone else is at, what their thoughts are on that. And my concern is I don't want the public to think that the committee is making decisions about what our highest priorities are. So I'm not sure I said that very eloquently, but it's out there.
Councilmember Blackwell.
Yeah, I think I'm going to address the deputy mayor's last point there. I think we're asked to give some input on who should do the ranking. I guess I was thinking about that as a two-step process. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of projects. And this group, the Infrastructure Task Force, has been very close to assembling the list and the rubric. To me, that seems like a good first step is to apply it and do a proposal, but then have an open session where we might have another joint meeting, invite, make sure there's even more of the public here, and really go through that and debate some of those, because it won't be 100% right, and it probably does need some additional input. But I think just that process of going through the list initially would be a really good use of the task force time. I just want to say one more thing. I did also review all of their backgrounds again, and the fact they represent all the districts that we have. It just felt like this is a very qualified group. So,
Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, and speaking of the prioritization, I really appreciate you doing the deep dive and getting into it, but ultimately, it will come back here. I view this no different than a planning commission, than a mobility safety commission recommendation to the city council. Ultimately, this is a budget exercise. And the CIP, by the way, is only one portion of the budget, and we're the ones elected and responsible for it. So, of course, the buck stops here. We're going to have to do the ultimate call. So, but that said, I appreciate all the work. I appreciate all the rubric, and that's the explanation, too, helped me, too, because I didn't fully understand it till tonight. And I think that'll make it all the more useful to me now that I understand the thought that went into doing the priority. And so when I see the results and the public can weigh in and advocate, I think we'll do what we do every year with budgets and balance and weigh and decide where we go from here and whether we can get additional funding anywhere. So, thank you.
Yes, and so I apologize. I have well, I don't apologize for having a day job, but I apologize that I had to step out and make a very important phone call for that day job. It was unfortunate because apparently I missed my colleagues identifying the priorities that they want to add to the list. That's what it sounds like I missed. I don't know. I heard a couple. I'm not sure that I agree that Pacific View is going to need anything anytime soon that would be on this list, but maybe Councilmember Hensy has some specifics about that. I read that letter regarding traffic at our interchanges, and I do consider the 6 interchanges in our city, maybe 5 now that Manchester's had its improvements, but the other 5 are really important to address. I know with Encinitas Boulevard, there was talk by the city council 15 or 20 years ago of putting in cloverleafs to eliminate left turns. Left turns at our interchanges are the killer for traffic. And my understanding is that Caltrans said to the city, if you guys want to put in cloverleafs, you can pay for the difference on the cost of the cloverleafs. I think it's important that we, at this point, take a look at ways that we might be able to address the impacts on traffic that the interchanges have. So I do think that should be on the list. Straightening Saxony with Calle Magdalena is another one that, as I read, it was being considered in the 90s, and it should be back to being considered, especially with the amount of housing that we're putting on Quail Gardens Drive at the intersection of Encinitas Boulevard. So, these are a couple of things that I would have loved to see in your discussions, but ultimately, I think that there's still plenty of opportunity to have these particular discussions about ways to improve the circulation, the mobility aspects of our city. So I'm looking forward to that. Deputy Mayor Lyons, did you ask to speak again?
Yes, I did. Going back to what Mayor Kranz was saying about Pacific View and whether it's on the list or not, I think your response to that was, well, it's not on the list because it doesn't need any money right now. But the thought was, well, it might need money in the future, so maybe. So this goes back to what's on the list and what's not. So I want to kind of tie it back to maybe it's not only what's infrastructure, but let's be clear about what's on the list and what's not. And I think we've got a few mixed messages in here. For instance, item 136 is the CAP annual reporting, and that's under climate action. It's a small amount of money, but it's an administrative activity associated with reporting on our CAP plan. I wouldn't call that infrastructure based on what I'm understanding we're saying infrastructure is. And so if that's on there, if it's an administrative activity, then would some other administrative activities be on here too? I don't know. I'm just kind of calling that out as an example.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's many more columns to this spreadsheet, so I'll dig more into what that CAP annual reporting represents. And you're right, if it's administrative, then we shouldn't have included it on the list unless you guys direct us otherwise to include administrative items.
And I guess I'm making 2 points, so thank you for that. And the second point is, this is like it's like chasing the tail. Where does it end? Because with Pacific View, if it doesn't need anything today, well, it's an evolving thing. So how then do we tease out what? It doesn't need anything today, but we're going to put it on the list. Well, what are the other things that don't need anything today that should be on the list? So I don't have an answer other than a comment. But and it kind of comes back to definitions. And if we could be really clear about what the clear definition is of what's on the list versus what's not, that might help us answer all these questions.
Understood.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Joy on that point. And then to answer your question, Mayor, about Pacific View, I think, we're working with what we can at Pacific View, but I think that there's some goals for perhaps stormwater management, best management practices. There's a lot of asphalt there. I hope someday we'd be able to scale that back, have more vegetation, invest in tree canopy, and, a lot more beautification through plants. So that's why that's one of my priorities. I know we probably each have our own, and every artist out there has their own as well, but I do think that it should be included on that list. What I see here is a really monumental effort to wrap our arms around everything, and thank you so much to the members of the committee who put so much time and effort into this and really picking through everything. When I first joined council, we had a list that was similar to this, but it was like growing longer every day, and sometimes we not see it for months, and it was like, what's happening with this project or that project? So really, to me, just being able to wrap our arms around what our needs are, resurrect things I haven't seen in years but are really worthwhile projects, is a valuable endeavor. For consideration, because I think we one of the outstanding issues that we do have is facilities. How do we include those facilities for future planning? One that you might have missed, Tony, while you're on your call, was that Jill brought up Surfers Point or Hippie Hill. Is that one that we want to include? Because I think we do at least have the desire to clean it up, get some trash removed, remove some invasives, perhaps plant some native plants there, and at the very least just make it nice and a place where people aren't driving their massive trucks around. So I am in favor of including projects that fall under the facilities list, and that would include Pacific View, the 100% affordable project, and Surfers Point.
And yeah, when it comes to facilities, I do know that this particular City Hall site is identified as the site of a 500-space parking garage too, and that's part of the Sandag Regional Transportation Plan that it needs to be taken into consideration as well as what should this site, how might this play a role in a redevelopment of downtown? Parking is always an issue. I'm not saying a 500-space garage is needed, but we should, I think, identify what is needed and how we might affect the ability for people to park at this site instead of driving up and down the 101 looking for a parking spot. But again, back to the facilities question, and to me, you know, the question of how to prioritize improvements to any city facilities is one that we have to kind of put the list together and identify which is the higher priority. Another idea might be to, instead of you know, getting too fine on this list, is make sure that the things that are $100,000 or more are what we have on the list. And so the update of the cap that happens based upon the ability that we have with potential resource, you know, additional resources. Obviously, we're going to need to update our cap, and so maybe that comes out of just the general operating of the city. So, Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Thank you. And it occurs to me as everyone's talking that it might be a good place to start is to have a list of what we own. And, you know, because we own facilities, we own open space, we own things. Those are assets. And that's probably infrastructure, and then vet from there. Maybe some things like this property here are always on the list, but we don't have any need right now. I'm just saying, maybe that's the case, but we remember that this is what we own, and that's an asset, and it's infrastructure. So I apologize for talking so much, because when our prior council member, Joe Mosca, and I put this forward almost, I guess, 2 years ago, I really keep this, I'm really passionate about what we do here. So now's a good opportunity for us to provide our input. But I also do want to ask Linda and Culp whether you and your committee have questions for us that we could.
Well, excuse me just a minute. Before we get on to their questions for us, maybe we can see if there are any public speakers. No public speakers, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, so I wanted to open up the conversation to any of the task force members. Linda's up there where she can, has the microphone. If any of the other task force members want to speak, you can come up to the podium. We can start with Linda, or, we're going to start with?
Yeah, I think before we leave the project list, Task Force Member Nunez had some comments.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor of allowing me to serve on this committee. And the work of this committee would have not been possible without the countless hours of this staff, who's been very diligent. Their efforts to provide the best solutions for our city while being constrained by a limited and challenging fiscal capacity is and should be recognized. Their presentations to the ITF have been incredibly informative. Their work is formidable. But I feel compelled to express the following in order to make the results of this committee as robust and forward-thinking as possible. As the District 1 representative on the ITF, I'm sensitive to the projects of my district and that these projects are well addressed while also addressing the larger needs of the city in an equitable and efficient manner. The listing and rubrics presented today are robust. However, I do have a concern. And I'm sorry, this is premature in that I didn't know we were going to be talking more about these lists after today, but I think this point may be important to consider. It's really regarding to the process by which these listings have been pared down. As background, and as presented on slide 21 and 22, there is a process followed in the distillation of the lengthy capital improvements project listings. Slide 21 indicates the process used to get from over 300 projects to 184 projects. Further culling of the list results in the 73 projects listed in the final listing. I received this listing yesterday, and after reviewing it, something popped out at me, and this is why I'm here to speak to you. A particular omission of a project on these lists presented to you caught my eye and has shed light on a possible vulnerability in this process, in this proposed process. The MAP study, a component of the ATP study approved in February of 2023 by this council, provided the city with a prioritized list of bike and pedestrian projects that reflects the community's desires and values, and furthermore addresses safety issues. When reviewing the listings that have been presented today, there is a glaring omission of the number one recommended project identified by the map. That project is the Vulcan Avenue multi-use path from La Costa Avenue and Santa Fe. That's in the 73 item list. I brought this omission up to staff, and the response was that the path on Vulcan is basically a segment of the Coastal Rail Trail, which would be the ultimate goal for Vulcan. I agreed this would be a great goal. But I believe this classification could be misconstrued now and in the future, and this sheds light on the need for more specificity of projects on this listing, as well as the need to incorporate results brought forth by the many studies performed by the city. This list should reflect and provide specificity so projects in the future cannot be misconstrued or confused. Furthermore, and to my surprise, both the number one ranked project, the Vulcan Avenue multi-use path, and the Coastal Rail Trail ultimately do not appear on the reduction list of 73 projects presented. This illustrates that by subcategorizing the Vulcan Avenue multi-use path as the Coastal Rail Trail, all prior map prioritization value has been lost. By doing this highest prioritized map project then simply drops off the radar. Professional judgment of this staff is not in question here. The guidance by which paring down this list is in question. Specificity should be included in all listings. A rubric to guide decision-making at this point is not available, but objective sources such as studies and critical needs assessments should be considered and not missed when formulating these projected lists. Your guidance as a council is requested. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other task force members wish to speak?
Scott Maloney. So I'm a little concerned listening to this discussion that we're going to be handing you a document that's not actionable and has a lot of good information. And Deputy Mayor, you started to open the door to a conversation about what's next. What are we doing next with this polling? And to me, it doesn't matter if we hand you a rubric or a list of priorities. The bottom line is there's too many projects and not enough money. So what do we do about it? So I think it would be helpful if you gave us some direction on this next step for us as we look at the solution to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Diana mentioned the studies, and I do see that the Coastal Rail Trail is identified as a CIP, and I did interpret the Coastal Rail Trail Santa Fe to La Costa as that map top priority. I do know that now we're going to have Santa Fe to E Street that will be constructed as part of the Sandag budget. We just got $9 million reallocated for that purpose. It is 100% designed and shovel-ready, so within the next couple of years, that will be built so that $25 million can be reduced by 9, but at the same time, I know when we did the map, it was identified just between La Costa and I think it went to Encinitas Boulevard as a $20 million project. So I question that $25 million number for that stretch. And then, as Linda is well aware, the Coastal Rail Trail was considered to be something that would move from the east side of the corridor to the west side at approximately El Portal, and then that would leave the east side of the corridor from La Costa Avenue to El Portal without bike and pedestrian facilities in the railroad corridor, which would be a shame because it's desperately needed. So some of these issues I would love to see worked out. The other thing is that we did a study 6 or 7 years ago. It was the Coastal Mobility, Livability, and Working Group. Ron Dodge was on it, and it was a fairly large group of community members that put a lot of time into looking at the railroad corridor and how it can become a better neighbor. And there were the process included basically imagining what the corridor would look like in a unconstrained budgetary environment. So where would you want to put crossings? And so this stretch from here to Santa Fe included some bridges overhead, and at Encinitas Boulevard, there were pedestrian bridges over the entire intersection that took a bridge also north to south, so it was an east-west bridge plus a north to south bridge, and none of that can I find in this. Maybe it's in there and I just don't see it, but again, making use of previous iterations of community input on important infrastructure issues would be an important part of this for me. So, Deputy Mayor Lyons.
I appreciate the comments from the committee. Thank you. I have some thoughts and put them out there for consideration. I think that going through the action of read my notes here, sorry, doing a paring of the list or a short list or some sort of staff paring, I think that is a step that we might not want to take, because the rubric was not used to do that list. At least that's how I'm seeing this, because the rubric specifically has consistency with city priorities as a scoring item, meant, and maybe that's not the only place where this could come in, but that's meant to identify where the highest priorities are in the documents we paid lots of money and gotten lots of public approval behind. So to shortcut and make a short list that doesn't use the same criteria that we're using might be incorrect for that reason. Now, I appreciate staff's input, but maybe there's this process needs to go forward in a different way. And I might suggest, and I just want to throw this out there because you make a good point, Scott, in how is this actionable? But it's not only that, it's like, how is this done every year? How often is this done? I'm thinking it's every year because we budget every year. And how do we implement this over time? I think that we have a bit of testing to do between now and when the committee's work is done, where we kind of go through the motions, and maybe we call it, I forget what we call it, a straw something. Does somebody have the right? Straw man. What's it called again? Straw man. Straw man, thank you. A straw man to go through the process of using the ranking. What does that mean? Can a shortlist first be put together from the ranking, or is that even an action we want to take? Go through it and kind of test it out. But I'm throwing this out there because I don't think any of us has talked about it yet. But it seems like we don't know what we know until we do that. And to see how the numbers come out and why the numbers are ranked in a certain way and have dialogue around that so it's very transparent. So it doesn't look like something where you just enter these numbers in a machine and something pops out. We understand why you may, in a straw man, go through the process and see how that was done and how you ranked it and why you made decisions. From that, we can vet a little bit better. Oh, well, that means this and that means that, and tease that out. So I'll throw that out there as an action that the committee could do. However, ultimately, I think that the committee is so knowledgeable, so I appreciate that, and could be valuable to helping to translate this as somewhat ambassadors to the community, because there'll be a lot of questions about what did you do and how do you understand it, and why is this a valuable thing for our community? And you've been down deep in this for, it will be a year, so you may be relied on to help explain some things. And that might be just informal dialogue with your groups that you're connected with. But ultimately, I see that this will be something that staff will implement, go through a draft prioritization, but that would come to the community and come to City Council for final vetting. We hadn't talked about that yet, but I wanted to throw it out there as how I see this might move forward. So if we could take a few minutes, if anyone has any thoughts about that that approach as our next steps.
So I think one of the, we go into it kind of in the next portion of the slide, is what's contained in the final ITF report. So one of the reasons why we're looking to kind of pare the list down is one of our goals was to create a 10-year CIP work plan. So as you saw, even the 73 project list is really unobtainable. So it's going to be a very small list, maybe it's 20 projects, something like that, that is the ultimate goal of the project or the ultimate outcome of the 10-year plan. And so once we have an idea of what the potential revenue is, and we can build that in, okay, if we're expecting X number of dollars each year, then we know our 10-year program will be that number of dollars times 10. We'll be able to kind of figure out where we draw the line on which projects are going to kind of rise to the top through this effort. And then with that, we'll look to refine the costs for those projects that will be in the 10-year plan. So we haven't done the refining of costs yet, to the earlier point that was brought up, because we didn't have the resources to do that for 184 projects, and it didn't make sense to do it for 184 projects for this effort. So that will be coming. Cross Connect, which is the end result basically of the coastal mobility and livability, is project number 91, so it is in here. So we are attempting to include all of the important planning department projects. So then just for your information, so with the 184 project list, if we're able to rank these projects within 3 minutes, it would take 10 hours to rank all the projects. With the shorter list of 73 projects, if you did 3 minutes per project, that would be 4 hours. So we're just trying to kind of gauge, is this an effort that City Council wants to undertake? Is it something you want ITF to undertake? So I heard earlier it sounded like there was some comfort with the ITF doing that. So we still have some more work to do before we get to kind of what that final report will look like.
Okay. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Yes, I was also going to say that I think that there's still value to have this task force grappling with this list and helping us with the prioritization for exactly the reason that Diana Nunez just identified, is that these members have the historical knowledge to remember, oh, shoot, we forgot to add this part, or how are we going to deal with it? And I just wanted to call out that point that she made and that the mayor made as well, because when I served on the Coastal Mobility Livability Working Group, and the consensus that came out of that group, and this is also actually in the North Coast Highway 101 specific plan, is that there needs to be a multi-use path on either side of the rail. And that's the goal. It's not the streetscapes multi-use path, it's not the rail trail, it's somehow we've got to get to both of them. And I know that we've got the challenge of drainage on Vulcan, which I was pleased to see made it into this list as well. But I don't have the solution, but I hope that we can break that up, because there might be some redundancies in here, like the streetscape phasing for that missing segment might include that multi-use path on the west side. The Vulcan drainage, or actually it was the Cross Connect study that you called out, might also be redundant with the CRT broken out in its own line. So I do support Diana's point that we need to tease those things out, and we need to make sure that that priority is still established, because she's right, it not only came up in the map, but it's also coming again before us tonight as part of the housing element update as the #1 project for Leucadia. So it's up to you how those are all broken out, but I do think it's important that the path on either side, plus the Vulcan drainage and the streetscape drainage, remain part of what we're trying to encapsulate.
And a couple other questions, kind of curiosities on the list. 47 says Leucadia Streetscape Segment A Street to Marchetta, $10 million. And I do know that the Keno's project was recently approved and not appealed. And there's a lot of that frontage between A and Marchetta that will be a part of that project. So I'm assuming that number comes down. I'm not sure how much, but hopefully we can adjust it down. I'm also a little surprised at how big that number is because it doesn't include a roundabout. But I'm going to, I suppose just have to wait until we're ready to pull the trigger on some bids to see where it actually ends up. And then you've got Basil to Jupiter for $25 million. So I'm glad to see that the completing streetscape is part of what you've been talking about. And then item number 46 was a little bit confusing because I didn't know how 46 was different than, so it says Leucadia Boulevard sidewalk infill, Neptune to Eolas, $3.1 million. I didn't know we had that many gaps between Neptune and Eolas. I know that we have the gap that is between Hymettus and Hermes, but there's a $4.8 million Hygeia roundabout, which I believe includes not just the roundabout, but that the sidewalks between Hymettus and Hermes. So a little clarification on some of those, and not only that, but there's another Leucadia Boulevard ped improvements only. So it's I think it was $600,000 or something. And I'm not sure, it says 44, Leucadia Boulevard roundabout at Hygeia, $600,000 pedestrian improvements only. What is that in relation to the whole $4.8 million 191, which is the roundabout? Plus, we have money already budgeted for that. So, fine tuning these numbers is important. And I get that when you're talking about $1 billion worth of stuff, maybe some of these millions just don't really add up to that much, but I think it's important that we are as accurate as possible on that. And what's the old saying about, $1 million here and $1 million there, and eventually you get into real money? Something like that. Councilmember Ehlers.
Yep, Senator Everett Dirksen from Illinois.
Yep.
And right along the same lines of clarifying and correlating, I think I'll try and give you something really actionable. I'd like to see these line items correlated in a column here so I know which ones are one-to-one. If I read some of the titles, and I'll just take the one Mayor Krantz was talking about, the Leucadia Streetscape, what was that, 47? In one, it's got drainage, in the capital projects, it's got drainage explicitly in the title, and here it does not. So something that would help me, and I think it might help you too, is to get familiar with the current year funded capital and unfunded capital, and then show a correlation between the two. Number two, and this may be a lot of work, but give me some feedback. I'm used to when we go through capital improvement, at least when we did 10, 15, 20 years ago, we had a one page for each one. I'm not asking for the one page, but I'm asking for the verbal paragraph description, because so many of these, I can tell the devil is in the details. And the estimates that you're generating, and I have the same problem when I budget at work. I have to know what I'm trying to describe or what I'm trying to specify in order to get an accurate or even a reasonably rough order of magnitude estimate. So, and I have to imagine, I want to make sure we're on the same page as staff, as the task force, as the citizens. And I think we're at that height where that point in the process where that paragraph is going to be useful. The last thing that I liked is that we've gone through a thinning of the herd without using the rubric. So what I would propose is that we allow people to task force to add things that they think got inadvertently dropped, such as the example you cited. I bet there are more. I think the mayor has named 2 or 3. I could probably come up with 1 or 2, but just make sure they all get in there and get these descriptions before we score, then we score. So what I'm trying to do is describe a very actionable process to get to a rubric and a result that we all have some faith in. But when it all comes down to it, this is only the CIP portion, or it's a portion of the CIP technically, and we're going to have all sorts of other expenses that go into the budget limited budget number. So that's my recommendation. I don't know if I have any support for that kind of process flow.
So one of the other pieces to this is, as the mayor pointed out, and as Councilmember Ehlers just said, there's many ways to skin a cat. So we do have, knowing that we're going to have a limited amount of resources in a 10-year plan, we have parts and pieces kind of split out. Maybe we can't afford the entire roundabout at Hygeia and all of the pedestrian facilities. Maybe we can't. Maybe we can only get the pedestrian connections in and the roundabout comes in a future time. Same with streetscape. Maybe we get all the drainage and all the roundabouts and all the improvements at the same time, or maybe we just can afford the drainage, or maybe we just can afford the sidewalks. So that's why you'll kind of see some kind of different parts and pieces. If the preference is to kind of lump everything together and then we just have real big projects to tackle, we can do that, or we can keep things kind of piecemealed out so little pieces could move forward as kind of interim or incremental improvements.
Bruce, I think that you're on the right track. I think we'll hear some comments here, and then we'll circle back and address these 1, 2, and 3 items for direction in the staff report. Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Bruce, I think you're on track as well. And Jill, I appreciate that you explained it that way, because that does help. So being what you said here, I see items 13 and 14, and again, this is just alphabetically listed. This is in my district. It's Crest Drive sidewalk infill. 13 is Melba to Santa Fe, and 14 is El Camino Real to Melba. So that's not, in my 3 years in office, been identified as a concern from the public, and it hasn't also risen to a CIP. That must come from something. It says traffic. Could you explain where that comes from?
Give me a minute. Let me see if I can bring up the spreadsheet. Bear with me.
And really, it's just a matter of me understanding somewhat about what's going into this. It looks like unsurmountable, this list, because it's 184 items. You've broken them into segments, so that makes them more items. And I'm thinking, like, this is an example of one where I don't know how it made it here. Of course, it may be obvious. There's no sidewalk the whole way. This is maybe something we've identified somewhere, but it just hasn't risen to where I would expect it to be on this list.
I see that one of them is sidewalk infill and the other one is a trail, but my Excel is not.
Yes, you're right.
Up.
13 is infill sidewalk, and 14 is Crest Drive Trail. But it looks like they're contiguous.
Yeah, well, yeah, it came from the traffic work plan, so we'll have to kind of get some more detail on what the genesis of those two were.
The traffic work plan is a document where the public enters their inquiries about whether some traffic improvement can happen, and it's evaluated?
No, the work plan is posted online, but I don't recall it being on the work plan, even though I'm hearing that it's on the work plan. So we'll have to look into that one a little bit more and give you some more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on the breaking it out or lumping it together, and of course, I want to have both. But I'd like to see it organized where it's like sub-bullets, and you can have the line, and we could understand the individual line items, but having them logically grouped by big project, I think would help bring clarity to all of us up here. I'm seeing some nodding heads too. So I just, that way we could have, I think of it as a Chinese restaurant menu. So, I want this, but I want this sub-item or option there. And that would be helpful.
So we have different, we have roadway classifications, we have drainage classifications. So we have some of like the streetscape drainage under the drainage piece, and then, so is the preference to kind of get rid of the subcategories and just an alphabetical list?
No, I'm not trying to get rid of the subcategory, the detail, because I think you're anticipating the next step, which is, well, what if I don't do all of Project 1 and I just do Project 1A, B, C, D, or 1.1, 1.2? And so what I'm proposing is an organization of this exact list, plus anything that we thought was missing and the group puts back on, into Leucadia drainage, big project, and there are multiple segments that have different prices associated with, you've already estimated. I'm trying to get all the Leucadia drainage in one place. I'm trying to get all of the streetscape in one place. I'm trying to get, and I can go down, you understand. And that way we kind of get to see the bigger picture grouping. And when I looked at the donut chart, that tends to be more just the bigger picture, or else the one or two that it's already been split into are next to each other, and it was pretty obvious. Then you could kind of group them. It's just I'm trying to get our arms around the problem mentally so we can understand it a little better. And I don't think the average people out in the audience here, they not the ITF. You guys are in the weeds with us, but most people are going to look at it. Big picture items, streetscape, drainage, pavement, whatever. So that's how I'm trying to get it organized. And quite frankly, I almost sent an email to you asking for the big spreadsheet, because then I could go in and do that sorting myself. But I think we would all benefit from it. So my recommendation is that if the council agrees.
Yeah, and in fact, I was going to say to the city manager that this is a critical need. We have had challenges at budget time because we have the budget book that has the project, CIP projects in the back, and they have assigned project numbers, and, so the assigned project number has a particular name to it, and then we've got the donut list that has a little different name and no project number, and, and now we've just created a huge list that is a third, has the potential, and how to cross-reference to say, oh yeah, we already talked about that one over here. Oh, we've been working on that one for 10 years or whatever. And I get that this is a huge challenge, but this is critically important for both the policymakers and the decision makers on budgetary issues, as well as the public, to understand the history on this, what we're doing here. So, Councilmember Blackwell.
Yeah, I would concur that I agree with what we just heard about how you list them, both as groupings, but with subparts. But I also would want to make sure we're assessing the subparts with the rubric for that reason, because again, if you did the whole project, it may get a different rating than if you did the subparts. So I think it'd be good to do that.
Okay, thank you. So getting back to the 1, 2, and 3 requests here that are in our staff report. First request, you may know, but your slide was different than what was printed out, right? So, and I see that you created the list based upon the maximum scores from highest to lowest, but our staff report and this don't match that. So I think it's important to make sure we match up as much as possible. So number one is staff and ITF are requesting input from City Council on proposed project ranking rubric, its categories, and relative weights. And I will note that in this, in the text below that, it says a master list of over 300 projects. Attachment 1 was developed along with estimated costs totaling close to $1 billion infrastructure funding request. Attachment 1 is actually this. I don't think we have the list of 300 projects.
No, it was a lot of duplicates. So like the CAP team had a lot of input on, say, solar facilities and EV charging, but so did Public Works. They were also, so there was a lot of overlap from the different departments asking for similar things.
Okay, so I did hear a request to make livability and equitable community investment, make that an and/or. Are there other requests for the rubric and scoring? Deputy Mayor Lyons.
I'll throw this out there one more time, see if it sticks. I do think that we're doing some double dipping still with the importance of risk to health and safety, regulatory, mostly risk to health and safety and identified infrastructure need. Really, I think the 30, 28, 16, 14, 12 should be what our city's priorities are. Kind of how do we see our culture and our priorities? Because we are already weighting the outcome. And these are the fundamental numbers, 60, 28, 16, 14, and 12. Those are the fundamental numbers. We say this is more important than this. So we're already prioritizing. We're already weighting. I may be the only one who feels this way. I understand roadway improvements are critical and they're important. And some communities love new asphalt more than anything. I think our community is vested in other things equally. And I think those are more in the arts and culture and quality of life other than transportation asphalt. Maybe we are slightly more focused on arts and culture, and we have been. And I would really not like to change gears right now on that, simply because we've developed this scoring hierarchy that favors some things that I think are going to result in us favoring transportation infrastructure, roadway improvements over other things. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I'm willing to be told I'm wrong, but I just don't want something like this to all of a sudden end up changing who we are fundamentally. I'd rather go in the direction of saying, well, we're slightly different. Our past has shown us we're this kind of community, and we come together in public forum and we vote for these kinds of things. So I just want to throw it out there one more time that the maximum scores, we might want to
You could
revisit.
help by explaining when you say arts and culture, what is your fear in that regard, that we're going to end up paving a road instead of having an art night, or how do you see it playing? What is it that is? How does your concern play itself out in a negative way?
If we use this weighting, I wonder if and our investment in arts, I'm just going to use that as the word, and parks, and maybe I'm thinking open space, and would be diminished because they don't represent a risk to health and safety and regulatory, or they're not identified infrastructure need. So does that answer your question?
Well, I guess I sort of understand what you're saying, but I mean, we've had this $100 million budget, and we have funded our parks and rec and arts and culture activities to a certain level. And, while somebody may prefer a paved road to the activities that we're going to be undertaking at Pacific View or at the community center, I think that the community does value the activities that we're funding currently. And so to reduce those would not be the desire of a majority of our community. But it's one of the things that I think a survey would be valuable for, is to actually do a scientific survey and ask that. Are you happy with the arts and culture activities? Maybe 80% of the people are saying, no, we waste too much money on that stuff. I don't know. I would be shocked if that were the case. My hunch is that a whole bunch of people are going to agree. But that's the thing to me, is that, and I pointed to to the staff report that's attached here, attachment 3, that was pretty specific about the focus of the work of the task force was going to be on CIP. And so, yes, we're prioritizing CIP, but again, our CIP budget has always had fit within a particular framework of all of the resources that were available to the cities. So I don't share the same concerns about the prioritization and the scoring of these infrastructure projects, because I think they're a little bit apples and oranges. Did you have any thoughts that you wanted to?
No, but I heard you say something that I completely agree with, and that is that our community really does prioritize and has demonstrated we value arts and open space and parks and rec.
Yes.
And I'm totally on the same page there. So I would hope that this works into how we're prioritizing with the numbers we're choosing as our main numbers to prioritize our projects.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when Jill was talking earlier about the next step, polling the residents, I think will be some of that feedback that you're looking for, both of you are looking
Yeah.
for. So I think nothing is set in stone. I think that was the point we were all making earlier, but we're trying to get a rubric to get us in very close, but nothing, no rubric is perfect, at least none that I've worked with. But it should give us some framework to get us close, and then the polling will help inform our decision too, I think, and whether people value pavement over art by a great degree or not. I know from past surveys of the city going back to like mid-90s even, typically open space is very, very high, above parkland even, at least in every one of the surveys I've reviewed. And pavement usually is way up there too. So, but let's see what it says.
So are we good with number 1? Staff and ITF are requesting input from City Council on the proposed project ranking rubric, its categories, and relative weights. Are we happy with what we're seeing here? Okay, and add the /or to livability and/or equitable community investment. That'd be great. Number 2, staff and ITF are requesting input from City Council on the city infrastructure project list and whether City Council would like to rank projects or have the ITF rank projects. I think it has been discussed that having the ITF rank them is good. Again, as Councilmember Ehlers mentioned, we have advisory commissions and committees, and that's what you will be, as an advisory group. And ultimately, the 5 of us are going to take your recommendations and apply them to our deliberations and ultimate decisions about how budgeting would work. And then item 3, staff and ITF are requesting input from City Council on the final ITF report contents. Help me out a little bit. What would you like us to weigh in on there?
Yeah, we didn't get to that slide yet. So based on the scope of work and the mission goals that were identified in the November 2022, this was what we were looking at: the ITF background, the capital project backlog, future needs, prioritization criteria and the ranking rubric, the cost of the infrastructure backlog, 10-year future forecast with costs, and then recommendations to address the backlog, and then a discussion of staff resources. So those were the items that were included in the November 2022 scope and goals. Just wanted to do a check-in and make sure we're kind of pointed in the right direction and see if anybody had any other kind of requests or requirements. I'm hearing a request for some additional definitions, so we'll be happy to add those. So open to other, and to have little segments of the projects in the list.
Yeah, and I would ask the task force if they have any recommendations for additional information that should be included, or whether you're all comfortable. Mr. Stern, yes, sir.
Thanks for your time. One of the things that I think is very important that we need to look at is developing a sustainable and repeatable process so that in the future, you can do this every year without all of us being involved. So I think I think the final report ought to include how do we use this going forward every year, and create some efficiencies with that.
Yes, I take that as your request to not have to do this again. Is that what I should?
I'm cool with doing it again,
Yeah,
but
no.
I'm not going to be around all that long.
Yes, and I also think not only is it important that we look at what you describe, it's also, I think, important for many more members of the community to have a way to look at, how we came to this list and provide input on, things and how do we add. And so I don't know if when you started this process, you looked at other cities and how they created the rubrics, and maybe something that Dick talks about here is part of some of these other jurisdictions that we can plagiarize and implement as part of ours, so.
Yeah, I hear Dick's IBM training coming out. That's what I hear.
I like that suggestion, thank you.
And though it's not requested, I know that there was an RFP for polling, scientific polling, and I do think that it's my desire to have that issue come to the council because while I think polling on this particular subject is important, revenue raising, all alternatives maybe, but also the question of housing and affordable housing in particular and how to fund that. I think that it would be great to have the opportunity to poll our residents on issues related to those subjects. I do know San Mateo recently did some polling on housing issues, and in my reading of some of the questions that were asked, I think it would be really useful to poll our community on that. Councilmember Hinsey?
Yes, I was going to add, I know you said you wanted to take it up in the last couple of minutes of the meeting, but regarding the affordable housing project on Quail Gardens Drive, there's a lot of things we hope to accomplish there, including a park on the east or the west side of the street, some improvements on Quail Gardens Drive, perhaps a roundabout there, maybe some frontage, things like that. And I think that makes it extra important to include on this list because we want to be able to deliver on those promises. And if we have a RFP that goes out, perhaps we include those things. But if they're only going to be leasing the land for housing, then it might be the city's responsibility to do the others.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges that we have is that we haven't defined that project yet. That's the unfortunate thing is that we kicked that can down the road and we don't know, is it going to be an affordable housing developer that comes in or, and if so, then it's going to be, I don't know how that park across the street would be part of that or not. So I think that including that in the work that they're doing is pretty challenging, but it's definitely on our list of things to do. And out of that, we will hopefully have some pretty clear direction about where raising the revenue for that project is going to come from. And if it's part of this process, I think we're going to need to identify that. Councilmember Blackwell?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I was thinking about it. New projects are going to come up, right? If we have a repeatable process and a good rubric, we can put it through the rubric and understand where it stack ranks with the others. So I think that is a good, whether we do it annually or more frequently, it would be a good use of our time. So maybe that's where that 100% affordable project does go. It needs to come into it, but we may not be ready to assess it at this time.
Yeah, and I remember when we were trying to fund building the park, we emptied a whole lot of buckets of resources. We took a lot of money out of our budget and moved it over there. And, this is a dynamic process that will always be getting pushed and pulled and tugged, and people are going to come up and advocate. And there's a crowd in Northwest Leucadia that's definitely been pretty focused on advocating. And so, it's not going to make our job easier, but it's what they pay us the big bucks to do, right? I take that back. This is a part-time job. We do not get paid big bucks. Councilmember Ehlers.
So I don't see polling on here, because I think that's the step afterwards. On the, you had the ITF report. Will the ITF have any role in the formulating the polling questions about the various?
So we have polling experts that we hire to come up with the questions and the criteria and figure out who gets polled and things along those lines.
Yeah, and I'm not saying the particular wording of the question, because that's very scientific on not staying neutral. I mean, like the area and helping formulate how to get what groupings, and because a survey is usually a pretty short set of questions. They've been looking at this, and they know the big categories, and I was just wondering whether they would have any input to the topics, let's say, of the survey.
We can share what the polling consultants' recommendations are with them, for sure, for some feedback.
And that says, so what is this plan for conversations around polling? Is that something that will be back to the council 90 days?
So would you like to be a part of the polling?
Well, we want to definitely have input into what the polling is like, right?
You can. Some councils prefer not to be a part of that. If you'd like to be a part of that, we can bring it to council.
Well, I think that it would be good to know what is going to, be put out in the field and have some input if there are other subjects that we might want to explore. So I think it is something that I would prefer to have back.
The one thing that I would say, Mayor, is that, and I heard you mention that earlier, so in talking with the polling consultants, and as had been mentioned by, I think, Councilmember Ehlers, you have a limited amount of time, so the polling will focus on the question at hand. It's not a general poll. However, there are other survey polling web applications and companies that approach us every week that actually, as a matter of fact, our communications team are talking to that could do some of those question answering, asking to the public separate from this. I'm not sure our polling consultant would advise that we put a whole range of topics for just general information. The topics that they'll include are what types of things do people think are, that we're short of money for.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that what I'm interested in hearing from is the experts and getting a sense of what what questions will we be asking, and maybe if there are, I know there are contentious subjects that I think could use some scientific surveying done on. So I do believe that it's a subject that the council should to weigh in on. Yes, Deputy Mayor Lyons.
I just want to provide my support to you, Mayor, in wanting to be informed about what the polling questions will be and have an opportunity to give input before it goes out to the public.
Thank you. Councilmember Ehlers?
And similar comment, I want to make sure that we, this group agrees on the bounds of what we are and aren't asking. I'm going back to remembering the Godby survey in 2000 that was done prior to Hall property. Very similar. It was a big capital acquisition. There was funding discussion or questions in there to gauge the residents' acceptance of taxes or funding. So I just want to make sure that we don't just, hey, professional survey person, go do a survey. I'd rather see the bounds, and I think that's what I'm hearing out of everybody else.
Okay, did we answer your questions all right?
You did. Thank you very kindly.
Did you have anything you wanted to add? Nope. No? Any other council members want to comment? I see none, so we are adjourned.